You are on the road beyond. Welcome to the show. Good to have you with us. Welcome Facebook Live and our YouTube audience. I'm Todd Duplantis. We've got 2 live episodes heading your way. First up, I want to introduce my co-host. We've got Ike McFadden joining us from the hills of Tennessee. Ike, good evening, I should say.
How are you doing, sir? Good to see you.
It's good. Things have been good. Been a good week. Had a chance to read over the UAP report, which broke no ground last week. You know, nothing really new in that report, but I know we'll be discussing it further at length later in the show.
Did you? It really took you a week to read that 7-page report?
Well, I've tried to go through it to try to glean things out of it that I may have missed before by all the nonsense and nothingness that was in it the first time I read it. But yeah, I was able to pick out a few things, cherry pick a few things. We'll talk about that later. Hey, this is a very special episode of the show. You know why?
Tell me, Todd, why?
Well, it's episode number 25, and we've got a great one lined up for you. One of your favorite subjects, cryptids. We're talking Bigfoot. We're talking vampires. We're talking something called Tata Duende, which I'm thinking is kind of like a leprechaun, but our host is going to tell us all about it, Ike, because he is an expert on cryptids.
That's right. We've got Chad Lewis with us. He has for nearly 3 decades. He doesn't look that old. Chad has traveled the back roads of the world in search of the strange and unusual, from tracking vampires in Transylvania and searching for the elusive monster of Loch Ness to trailing, as you heard, Tata Duende through the remote villages of Belize and searching for ghosts in Ireland's haunted castles. The guy's been busy. Chad has scoured the earth in search of the paranormal.
That's right. So Chad has been featured on Discovery Channel to Haunting William Shatner's Weird or What? ABC's Scariest Places on Earth and Monsters and Mysteries in America, along with being a frequent contributor on Ripley's Believe It or Not Radio. With a master's degree in psychology, Chad has authored over 18 books on the supernatural and more extensively lectures on his fascinating findings. Of course, we're going to welcome Chad to the show. Chad Lewis, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Greetings from the Northwoods of Wisconsin.
Good to have you with us. I imagine the weather there is a lot nicer than it is in the Houston area. Do you guys have a real summer up there?
We have a few weeks of it, yes. Beautiful 70s temperature, great breeze, so many lakes. It's amazing. I feel sorry for a lot of you Southerners with the heat. I was just down south last couple weeks, and it's refreshing to get back to the air conditioning of America.
Well, Chad, we're glad to have you with us on the show. As we mentioned, you specialize in legends. Let's start off with, first I want to go to your trip to Transylvania. You were talking a bit about that before the show started. We were discussing Transylvania. Tell us about going to Transylvania, obviously looking for vampires. Is there anything you learned from that trip that you were able to take back and say, wow, I didn't know that?
A couple things. First of all, I was amazed that when I was out into the countryside talking with locals, digging up legends and lore of how serious a lot of people took these legends still today. Of course, this was over a decade ago, but up until that time, they still believed in these legends. And that's something that I found across the world, that many cultures and peoples look at these legends in a more serious tone than we do here in America, where they say, don't go looking for these things. What are you doing? Crazy American. We try to avoid these legends. So that really threw me off, is that I thought it would be a tourist draw, which it was in some areas, marketing ploy, which it was, but also there was this deep-seated belief that these things were based in reality.
Well, Chad, let me ask you something. I've not been to Romania, but I have been to Ukraine. And I remember very clearly, it was October of some year. And I believe we were at sort of the foothills of, I think it was the Carpathian Mountains. And I remember these clouds came across the sun. It got about 10 degrees colder very quickly. And I heard a wolf somewhere howl in the distance. And all of a sudden, I kind of got this chill down my spine. And I remember thinking, you can see why in this part of the world, werewolves and vampires were sort of a thing. I mean, is it a cultural thing, do you think? Is it part of the geography? Does that ring any bells for you?
Yeah, that's straight on, because I was on one night, I was staying out in this barn, this farm out in the middle of nowhere, no electricity. And anyway, needed some supplies for the next day. I was only about 2 miles from a small little village town. So it was getting dark. I said, I'll just walk into town, grab the stuff and be back. And all I had with me was this little miner's lamp on my head. And in the beginning, I'm walking through the woods and the moon's out and I'm thinking, this is great. Transylvania, how cool is this? But just like you said, all of a sudden it started getting dark and every branch breaking in the woods, and my mind was Vlad the Impaler coming up to grab me. And I ended up running to town, getting the supplies, and then running back as far as I could without my colleagues knowing I had ran the whole way. But I wasn't scared of a vampire getting me, but it was that atmosphere, that environment. There was something about it where you don't need a great imagination to believe a werewolf is sharpening its claws on the tree when you hear stuff in the woods. It was great. I was terrified and I loved it.
Well, you talked about the locals questioning, I guess, your sanity and coming there and trying to dig up these legends. Did that sway your opinion with your research and what you were doing over there? I mean, were they saying these are legends that were folklore, or are they saying these are legends that some of us actually buy into?
I think when I was in the heart of the bigger cities traveling, it was more like asking about Bigfoot in New York City. People just kind of move along type thing. But in the country where they still held these traditions and these deep held beliefs, that it was seen more as something that should not be tempted. Whether it was real or not, I don't know in their minds, but it was something that you should not even dive into. Why risk it? Even if there's a slight chance of it being real, why would you put yourself in that position?
This is going to be a little bit a question afield, but do you have any sense that part of the world, the Balkans, in those former Soviet republics, due to the geography, due to the history, the church is still a very big deal over there, the Orthodox Church. And you see it in the town squares, you see that they're joined in a way with the state that's not uncommon in the West. I mean, that's not uncommon in the West. That is not common in the West. Anyway, I wonder, did you ever get any sense of the degree to which religion, local folklore in a region feeds into people seeing things like this? Or am I going off a deep end here?
No, I think you're right on. Once again, is that in the movie, when you see that in Hollywood, somebody asking about a castle and then the townsfolk making the sign of the cross, I mean, that's not far off from a lot of these places. And I think it's that deep religious belief that may harbor some of these ideas that folklore is more demonic, or again, something not to mess around with because it'll lead to bad things because of their belief in their religion. I think that makes a big difference when you're in countries that religion doesn't play a big part in it. Nobody's out there at Loch Ness cursing about Loch Ness being some demonic form of the lake or the loch. Right. It's different in these other cultures.
Speaking of legends and culture, certainly Bigfoot is a legend here in the States. I'm sure that's not deep-rooted in religion, or maybe it is. But in your opinion, Bigfoot, with your research, is Bigfoot, first off, why do you not think we've found one alive or dead yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess the easiest answer would be they don't exist. You would think that so many hundreds of years of sightings, if you go back, nobody's found any substantial definitive DNA, no carcass, no bones, no dropping. So I guess if you're more on the skeptical side of things, you'd say, obviously, because they're not there. We haven't found evidence of unicorns either. But yet when you start looking at so many people, rational, logical, intelligent people who have had sightings that just can't be explained, it's really baffling to think that they're seeing something there. But what is it? We don't have the proof, but that doesn't mean it's not necessarily there, in my opinion.
So if you had to take a guess based on your research, if you had to just wager some money, I mean, what would you say the most likely explanation for Bigfoot, for example, is?
Yeah, if I was on, and this is the toughest question, flesh and blood versus something other. If I was on my deathbed and had to give an answer, I'd probably pick something other. Not necessarily like ultra-terrestrial or interdimensional or time traveling, but maybe something beyond our comprehension where I don't know if it's flesh and blood 100% of the time, like a bear or a moose maybe. But there's just so many odd things that happen when people experience it with UFO sightings, or if it all of a sudden does things that it should not be able to do, that no known animal is able to do. There's a famous case down in Murfreesboro, Illinois, of the big muddy monster where the creature was seen by numerous people with glowing red eyes, not a light shine or a reflection, but it was emanating from its eyes, something no known animal that we know of tends to do. So I guess I'm left with more questions than answers, because at the same side, there are people who believe it's flesh and blood, that it leaves hair and droppings. And then on the flip side, you have evidence as well. So I guess on an average day, I'm in the middle. I really don't know, because every time I think I figured it out, I find a new case that brings me back to square one.
You spent some time in Belize on the trail of something called Tata Duende. Is this similar to a leprechaun?
In a way, it's a trickster type form.
Right.
It's a diminutive creature, or man usually, 4 feet tall, usually wearing a sombrero. Sometimes will have a banjo, a big machete. It's a trickster in the fact that it tries to lure people into the jungle, and it will capture them, bring it to its lair, and they'll never be heard or seen from again. And it's really odd because it's an old man looking creature. Its feet are pointed backwards so no one can track it, even though everybody knows the legend of its feet being backwards. And it's one of those where it seems to have supernatural abilities as well. I was talking with what we would consider in the U.S. a park ranger, a national park ranger. And I was talking about the duende. And again, he advised me not to go looking for it. But once he opened up, he told me that when he was a young boy living in that area, he was playing in his backyard and he saw a man just on the edge of the woods singing or talking, kind of luring him over, beckoning for him to come in. And the boy said he was in a trance, that he was walking right toward the duende. And then all of a sudden his mother yelled, "Come home for dinner." And it was like he snapped out of the trance and he started bawling, telling his mother that a duende was out there. So it seemed to have this pull over him that he couldn't stop until his mother broke that spell. So I found it fascinating that many people believe that if you are not respectful of the jungle, if you're tearing down things or just not the best of intentions, that's when it comes after you, that it's a jungle protector of sorts.
Well, this kind of gets into some of, I guess this is American folklore, but you see it in a lot of cultures, this idea of this trickster spirit that doesn't necessarily represent itself correctly. And I think, as far as I know, the best representation we have in the U.S. is sort of the story of the Mothman, which is some kind of an unreliable narrator of supernatural events that maybe can be trusted, maybe is not trusted. To what degree are these things similar across cultures, or is it completely separate? Are these things unrelated? What do you make of that?
It seems every culture with the trickster has it where they're mostly evil or doing what they want to do. They're sinister, they have their own agenda, but oftentimes they can be helpful if the feeling comes over them. In Central America, they talked about their hellhound, their version of hellhounds. Cadeos, they're called, and they have a black version and a white version, and the black ones, much like your traditional hellhound, are said to guard portals to hell and do the devil's bidding. You don't want to see them, they'll lure you into the woods and devour you. But the white ones were said to actually guide people home, people that had had too much to drink at the taverns and were stumbling home. They would guide them and make sure they got home okay. And you find that a lot with the leprechaun, gnomes, sprites, the spirits of the fairy realm, where sometimes they're tricksters. They'll try to lure you, fairy lead you into their realm and you'll never return. Other times they'll help you when you're lost or hungry or in need of water. So I guess it just, if you're lucky enough to catch them on a good day, I suppose.
So you're saying the tricksters are kind of like Sour Patch Kids.
Yeah.
They're sweet, and then they're mean, then they're sweet to you. Okay. All right. That
Yeah.
works for me. Hey, I want to ask you about, we want to get into the Mothman a bit. And you talk about this trickster. We've been talking about various cryptids with guests on the show. The theme of the trickster keeps coming up, whether it be maybe the Men in Black or whether it be the Black-Eyed Children, Tata Duende, leprechauns, fairies. That theme keeps coming up. Could the Mothman legend be something along this line as well? Or do you think the Mothman is more of a harbinger to let people know that bad things are coming?
I think what makes the Mothman so interesting and why it's received such international interest is that there's so much surrounding it with the Men in Black, with the other phenomena that seems to be incorporated into the Mothman. Because if it wasn't, the Mothman's just another flying humanoid story, which there are a lot of throughout the world and the United States. But you throw in the bridge collapse and all the deaths and this thing where it seemed to be an omen of death, a harbinger of death. That I think that adds more intrigue to it. And to me, I think it's a bigger picture than just some flying humanoid out there. I think you hit it on the head saying that there's something more trickster or some other ulterior motive to it rather than just, some undiscovered species of animal.
Let me get back to, now I understand you studied psychology. What do you make of, is this stuff associated with archetypes like Jung would say? Are these things that, I guess I'm coming back to the same question. Do you think these things exist in some kind of genuine form? Is this some kind of projection of the unconscious? If you had to take a guess, where would you come down on this?
If I guessed on a lot of these cryptids, I would say that they're either some unidentified species that not known to science yet, or maybe a species that's thought to be extinct, especially when you start getting into sea serpents and lake monsters. But I think the trouble with that is many of these sightings will happen. There'll be a rash of sightings, a flap, and then all of a sudden decades without any sightings in an area. And then it comes back, where if these things are there and they're not just migrating all over, where did they go for 3 decades before they start terrorizing a town once again? So I think that there's something to it. And I did my master's thesis on students' belief in the paranormal. And what I discovered is that, and over the last 30 years, is that there seems to be no rhyme or reason to these things, that skeptics have these encounters, true believers, very religious, not very religious, the well-educated, the not so well-educated, and on and on and on. It doesn't seem to just happen to a certain person at a certain time with a certain belief system, or human perception seems to be so weird that we can't pin it down. And for me, that's the most frustrating thing, is when I got into this field, I thought, I'll solve this case. I'll figure out what this thing was. And I learned right away that for me, at least, that wasn't going to happen. I better shift gears and see this as more of an adventure or the folklore of how these things progress and morph. Otherwise, I'm going to burn out very quickly, like a lot of my colleagues did.
Chad, you have a new book, one of your newer books. I think you said you've written over 25 of them now.
I think that's right, yes.
Yeah. The newer one that's coming out is called Lumberjack Creatures of the North Woods. Real briefly, what can people expect with this one?
Well, you're probably already familiar with a few, like the jackalope, the hodag, the hide behind. These were creatures, in quotes, that the lumberjacks of the North Woods during the 18 and early 1900s believed were out in the never-ending woods across America. These creatures like the hide behind that could hide behind you no matter what you did, and the splinter cat, which would smash a tree with its head. So they're, quote unquote, unbelievable creatures that the lumberjacks would tell stories at night in the bunkhouse, trying to scare one another and explain all the noises in the woods. And they're kind of a forgotten segment of these mythical creatures, especially in the North Woods of America. So I wanted to bring them back into light.
Chad, we appreciate you being on the show. Your books can be found on Amazon, and where can people find you on the web?
Sure, just find me on my website, Chad Lewis Research.
Chad, thanks for being here tonight and shedding light on a few of these legends. Certainly, as you learn more, it seems like the more questions you have.
That's true, and thank you, and keep an eye out, guys.
Thanks, Chad. All right, Ike, I guess, as he was saying, with studying psychology and with his masters, it does seem like the more he learns, the more questions he has. Like, what the heck are these things that are out there? Maybe they are somewhere in the middle. Some of them are in people's mind, but then you also have people like police officers, firefighters, military personnel that are coming forward saying, we've seen these things as well, especially with the Bigfoot sightings.
Well, if you want to get sort of, more philosophical about it, it's not clear to me exactly where the line is, and this is as a very rational person, between what's in my mind and what I see or detect outside. And I think that's a lot where you get mythology and you get folklore and you get archetypes of things that seem to keep reoccurring in the culture based on, human psychology, the fact that all people have similar experiences, being born, being raised, dying, and that, if I had to guess, that plays some role in all this.
Well, the connection of religion that you talked about, especially in Transylvania, surely that played a big role. There was a Vlad the Impaler, that was truth, but the legend that spurned on after it obviously was deep-rooted in the old ages thing of good versus evil, taught by the church.
Yeah, well, and that's also another interesting point. Is a lot of if you study mythology, you see a lot of characters show up in different religions. You sort of have sort of a god, and then you have the son of the god, and then you have sort of the bad son, and then the son of the god has to go into the underworld and accomplish something. And there's a lot of crossover between Egyptian mythology and Christian religion, and and I believe I was just reading something recently that the concept of Lucifer is related originally to, I forget exactly the etymology, but to Diana the Huntress. They're both associated with the morning star Venus and sort of renewing some aspect of the hunt and so forth. So yeah, all this stuff's very interesting.
Want to bring our producer Pete into the conversation. Pete, so last week, we didn't get a chance to get a lot more from you, but last week, the government released their findings on UAPs, which really, folks, are UFOs. That's their new term, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Pete, our producer, expert in all things paranormal and UFOs, by the way. What is your take on what happened with this? Did you have a chance to read over it some more, or are you kind of done with it?
Actually, I'm a little disappointed with it, to be honest with you. Yeah, and I kind of am done with it right now. Yeah. It just seems like it's the same stuff.
Right.
I think that as we discussed before, with all of the black ops and stuff that our government has, I'm really thinking that it might be something that we have that's out there. And I know that when we see something, it's like 20 or 40 years old already. So we don't know what type of craft we have out there that's being tested. I know that Groom Lake was a facility that they used to test a lot of the stuff that they had, along with the re-engineering that a few people have talked about that they had worked on out there. So I'm really thinking it's stuff that we're working on, to be honest with you.
You think it's stuff the U.S. already has under the Black Ops operation. That's your take. Let me get Ike's take on this. Ike, what the hell's flying around out there, and why are we catching it on tape, and why is it going 40,000 miles an hour? Your take on this.
Well, and I'll defer to Pete on this as well, but my best guess is it's one thing to see some kind of video or photograph or recording or radar reflection that appears to be doing something unusual. It's an entirely different thing for it to actually be an event in time and space. So the fact that you can look at something and you look at the video and you say, based on that angle, it appears to be going unusually fast and unusually high rate of speed. that does not mean that that's actually reality. But from what I'm hearing from Pete, you seem to think that these, some of the recent videos you believe are in fact capturing reality as, we would normally interpret it?
I'm thinking it's a possibility. I mean, we're always working on new ways of travel or whatever, especially with the military complex that's out there. I think it's a possibility. I don't think it explains everything. I tend to believe a lot of what you're saying as well, that some things are misidentified or other things that we just either don't have an explanation for or don't want to explain.
Okay.
Let me ask you, what was that giant triangle thing that was going on around for a while that actually I think was traced back to like a Lockheed project? Is that correct?
I think it was like, what, a TR9, TR4?
Yeah. Something like that. Now that to me seems like, okay, that, it's an ultralight that's quiet. Okay, that doesn't violate physics. But
they aren't the size of like 5 football fields.
Well, again, that doesn't violate physics. A giant ultralight blimp of some sort could be huge. That's not the same thing as accelerating to 40,000 miles an hour.
Right. Totally. So here, I had a chance to read over the report a bit more this past week. And my first take is a whole bunch of nothing. I still maintain that. But some interesting things happened this week. And I want to go over a couple of things. First off, Marco Rubio, the Republican senator from Florida, issued a statement this week saying this report is an important first step in cataloging these incidents, but it's just a first step. The Department of Defense and intelligence community have a lot of work to do before we can actually understand whether these aerial threats present a serious national security concern. So he's the guy that actually asked for this to be released. That's his take on it. And also, if you go back and read through the report, it says 18 cases that the UAP demonstrated technology so advanced, we cannot replicate it or duplicate it. It defies physics. We just don't have the technology available. I'm sorry, Pete, but I just don't think we have the technology available. I get what you're saying. You think it's ours. I don't. The report also gave you 2 conclusions, okay? Here were your 2 conclusions. One, it was advanced drones, which Pete maintains, okay? The second of the conclusion, it's something called other. What is other? Well, China, Russia, I don't think it's either one of them, and I'm going to tell you why, because this has been going on since World War II. If we go back and we look at since this UFO phenomena has been happening, it can take you back to, the Roswell case or before that. So right around World War II. That means China and Russia are out of the equation. They don't have the technology. They didn't have it then. They don't have it now. We spend a lot more money than 2 combined on technology for the military. They don't have it. So we're going to have to consider, Pete and Ike, that possibly this phenomenon is coming somewhere outside of Earth. Maybe another dimension, maybe from the sky, maybe from, Pluto. Who knows? But we're going to have to consider that at some point. And that's what the report did not say.
Well, let me say this, Todd. If you are our government, are you going to tip your hand to what we have? So
no, but I'll deny it. I'll deny it, number one, and just totally debunk it. They've gone in with this report. So if they would, no, I'm not. I would deny it. I don't think that we have the technology available through physics.
Yeah, but they've been denying it all these years. So
why stop now?
Okay, why stop now? Then again, people are expecting some type of an answer. So you have to. I mean, they're under the gun, so they have to give some type of answer.
They have to sooner or later.
And why would you give them what they're already expecting? They want to hear something.
These are the same guys. We could see a Mars shot of a Coke can, and they try to tell us it's a rock formation. These are the same guys behind that. Come on now, Pete. You know that.
Let me throw this in here. I think this is to give Todd credit. He mentioned this stuff has been going on since at least World War II in the 40s. And as everyone knows, China was not even invented until 1977.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, but you say that the 70s wasn't an era.
I think it's debatable. I've seen, let's just say I'll put it in the I don't know. We'll put it in the sort of interdimensional maybe category.
Yep. There you go.
Okay. All right.
All right. Well, guys, we're going to wrap up the show. I think our next guest is on tap, and we're going to introduce him in just a little while. So, folks, if you're watching us on Facebook Live and YouTube, we'll be back with our second show very shortly. Ike, you want to remind folks about our social media?
Folks, we have social media. It's that thing the kids use with their phone, and it's like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and that stuff. You know. It's like, so it's the Road Beyond podcast. You'll find us.
All right. Also, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Pete, Ike, stick around. We'll see all of you next time on The Road Beyond.